Welcome to Sufi Mindfulness Yoga. I'm going to teach you a series of exercises, Sufi exercises modified to a mindfulness kind of way that fit into a framework based on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Now, to understand these exercises, you need to get some background in psychology and the psychology of emotions and the physiology of emotions and the physiology of speech and the combination of speech and emotions. All right? Very keyed in with the idea of mantras, but with the twist. And we'll see what that twist is. Now, the psychology of emotions we can look at many different ways, but what we're going to use here is looking at emotions in three dimensions: dimension of arousal, dimension of pleasure, and a dimension of control. And each of these dimensions of emotion have a primary control based in one of the three basic areas of the brain. And these areas of the brain are sometimes referred to as the reptilian brain or the brain stem, which controls arousal, the mammalian brain or the paleo-mammalian brain, the original mammalian brain, which controls pleasure-seeking, levels of pleasure. And the third area of the brain is the neocortex, the outer shell of the brain, which is highly developed in primates, particularly humans. And this is where control emanates from. How we develop control of ourselves, how we feel in control, how we feel that somebody else is in control. Now here's a chart that shows the three dimensions of emotion with their corresponding brain particular area. And you can see there are two poles on each dimension. There is an empty pole indicated by the negative signs and a full pole indicated by the plus sign. So in arousal, emptiness in arousal would be relaxation. Full arousal, of course, speaks for itself, very highly aroused. Empty pleasure is lack of pleasure, perhaps displeasure. Full pleasure, obviously something feeling good. For the control dimension, we can feel lack of control, like we're not in control, something else is in control. That is the negative aspect, or the empty aspect. And we also can feel in control, and that is the full aspect of that dimension. So these three levels of emotion, arousal, pleasure, and control, all based on individual areas of the brain, will map into the physiology of speech. Now, with speech, we have three main articulators. The jaw, we can move our jaw to make different sounds. Our lips play a big part in developing sounds that we speak with. And the tongue. The tongue is perhaps the most active articulator. So the tongue gets to play in a lot of different of the sounds that we make. And each individual sound that we make in speech is called a phoneme. And these phonemes vary from one language to another, except there are three universal vowels that every language has. And these vowels are A, U, and E. Now they may have a slight different sound to somebody trained in linguistics, so the A may be A instead of A. But we would hear that in our language as somebody speaking with an accent, not differentiating that sound. It's still an A to us. Anyhow, so these three vowels are the primary vowels, or the vowels found in all languages. And these vowels map into the dimensions of emotion. And as I mentioned before, the dimensions of emotion are arousal, pleasure, and control. And the vowels, when you form a vowel as you speak, it's an open vocal tract. So you ooh, e. We're not blocking the air, we're letting the air come through. We're changing the vowel sound by the shape of our mouth. Ah, for ah, we drop the jaw. Ah, ooh, we purse the lips. Ooh. In e, that's the lips and the jaw are not involved. It's more of letting the tongue let the sound out. So, the jaw maps to the arousal dimension, ah. And in the arousal dimension, the ah sound is empty arousal, it's relaxation. So what do we say what's the most common sound to say when you feel relaxed? Ah. Now, if we purse our lips, we make an ooh sound, ooh, push the lips out to ooh, make the ooh sound, and the lips modulate the pleasure dimension. And the empty space in pleasure is the ooh sound. Ooh. Something disturbing happens, you see something that not very pleasurable, ooh, like that spider, ooh. That's the sound that corresponds to the lack of pleasure. And with control, the third universal vowel is E, and that's lack of control. And I've heard this sound when a mouse appears somehow in our kitchen and my wife squeals, ee! Or you may hear this for a person on a roller coaster squealing, ee! As they feel out of control going down the roller coaster. So here's a chart that shows the three emotion dimensions with their corresponding articulators. And now in this next view, the three primary sounds have been added. Next, we've got to find the three primary consonants. Consonants are not universal. Languages don't hold the same consonants like they do with vowels. But we can still use the primary vowels and their corresponding articulators to come up with what we're going to call the primary consonants. We'll do this by constricting one articulator. And with the jaw, the ah is the primary vowel. If we constrict the jaw, that would be meaning raising the jaw to constrict the airway. The sound that we get will be an R sound. So we go ah. It becomes an R sound. Now, this R sound falls on the opposite end of the arousal scale than the ah. The ah is a very relaxed sound. The R is a very aroused sound, a very highly aroused sound. And this makes sense if you think of the R as an ancestral growl sound. If you're going to be very aggressive, that would be the sound that you would make. The second dimension to constrict is the pleasure dimension. We use the lips. The lips are the articulator for the pleasure dimension. We go from ooh. If we constrict the lips and nothing else, we just close the lips. And what sound do we get? Ooh. It's an M sound. Now the M sound is the opposite of lack of pleasure. It's full of pleasure. And this makes sense if you think of how people express their feeling of pleasure. That is so good. That's the M sound. The last primary consonant is done with constricting the tongue. The tongue can constrict the vocal tract in various ways. But the most absolute way of constricting the vocal tract that the tongue can do is to simply block off all air so that nothing goes around the tongue. And if you do that, what sound do you get? It's an N sound. Now, you might say, oh, what about the NG sound? The NG sound also constricts completely, but you have to use the back of the tongue, and that's, since it's attached to the jaw, it adds an element of the arousal dimension. So the strictly pure, most constricting sound with the tongue, and therefore the most controlling sound, is the N. And you can think of how you get control with a child. In our culture, it's the word no, and that's using the N sound. No. That is how we control our children, and that is the N control sound. Before we go, take a look at this chart, and it shows what we've discussed today, the 6 primary sounds and the emotion dimensions that they are associated with. And so in the next video, we will look at the non-primary sounds and how they become associated with various kinds of emotions and feelings and whatnot. So that's the next video. Once we have established the primary and non-primary sounds, then in the third video, we can get started with actual practices. Okay, see you then.